Imagine waking up with no alarm, no schedule, nowhere you have to be. You open your eyes when your body is ready. You stretch, you breathe, and the only question in front of you is, what do I actually want to do today? For most of us, that sounds like a dream. Maybe a vacation, maybe retirement. But here's what nobody tells you. For 99% of human history, that was just a regular morning. That was every single day for roughly 300,000 years. Right now, the average person burns through about 90,000 hours of their life working. That's nearly 1/3 of every waking moment you'll ever have handed over to a job. But for the overwhelming majority of human existence, jobs simply didn't exist. No wages, no boss, no career. So what were people actually doing with all that time? The answer is backed by real science, real bones, and real artifacts, and it's going to completely change the way you see your own life. Before we go any further, if this is already making you think, go ahead and hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would do with your days if you never had to work, and make sure you're subscribed. What's coming next is something most people have never heard before. Back in 1963, an archaeologist named Richard Lee did something that would quietly shake the foundation of everything we thought we knew about prehistoric human life. He traveled to Botswana and spent time with the Sand People, one of the few remaining groups on Earth still living in a way that closely mirrors how our ancient ancestors lived. And what he found completely dismantled the story we've been told about early humans. He discovered that adults spent roughly 2.5 days per week finding food. That's about 17 hours. Not 40, not 60, 17. The rest of the time, they did whatever they wanted. And before you think this was just one isolated case, here's where it gets even more interesting. This exact same pattern showed up across completely unconnected cultures around the world. The Hadza people in Tanzania, the Ache in Paraguay, the Martu in Australia. Different continents, different languages, different environments, and yet the same result every single time. Between 15 and 20 hours per week spent on survival activities. That's it. That's all it took to live. Now think about your own week for a second. Most people today work 40, 50, sometimes 60 hours just to cover their basic needs inside a system we built ourselves. Our ancient ancestors were securing food, raising children, and maintaining their communities in less time than most of us spend sitting in meetings. The picture of the primitive human constantly fighting to survive, hungry, desperate, exhausted, that picture isn't just incomplete, it's wrong. And the deeper you go into the evidence, the more that becomes impossible to ignore. Now, some people hear all of this and think, okay, but those are modern hunter-gatherer groups. How do we actually know ancient humans lived the same way? That's a fair question. And the answer doesn't come from guesswork or theory. It comes from bones, literally. When archaeologists compare the skeletons of ancient hunter-gatherers to the skeletons of the first farming populations, the difference is not subtle. Early farmers were shorter. Their bones show clear signs of nutritional deficiency. Their teeth were riddled with cavities, a direct result of grain-heavy diets that ancient humans simply didn't eat. Their spines showed arthritis from years of repetitive bending and plowing, and they died younger, significantly younger. The pre-agricultural skeletons tell a completely different story. Taller, stronger, bone density, healthier teeth, far less joint damage. These were not the bones of people who spent their lives in constant physical struggle. These were the bones of people who moved well, ate varied diets, and didn't grind their bodies into the ground doing the same motion day after day after day. The physical evidence is unambiguous. Our ancient ancestors were doing less repetitive labor than the farmers who came after them, not more, and their bodies were better for it. So here's the part that should really make you stop and think. If they weren't working all day just to survive, and their bodies prove they weren't under constant physical strain, then what were they actually doing with all that free time? Because they had a lot of it. And what archaeologists found next is something that almost nobody expects when they picture life 100,000 years ago. So if ancient humans weren't spending their days exhausted and desperate, what were they actually doing? The archaeological record gives us a pretty stunning answer, and it starts inside a cave in southern France called Chauvet, where 30,000 years ago someone walked into the darkness and painted. Not scratched walls, not random marks. They painted horses in motion, lions with depth and shadow, animals that looked like they're breathing, perspective, shading, composition. This wasn't survival. This was art in every real sense of the word. But Chauvet isn't even the oldest example. That takes us to Blombos Cave in South Africa 100,000 years ago. Archaeologists found tiny shells, perforated, threaded, worn as beads. Someone walked nearly 40 miles just to collect those shells from the coast. Then they came home and spent hours carefully drilling holes through each one using stone tools, not for food, not for weapons, just to wear something beautiful. Think about that for a second. 100,000 years ago, a human being cared about how they looked. Then there's Germany. 40,000 years ago, a vulture bone flute with 5 perfectly spaced holes, 5 not random holes, deliberately placed to produce specific musical tones. Whoever made that instrument understood pitch, they understood melody. They were making music because they wanted to, because it meant something to them. None of these things exist by accident. These people had the time, the energy, and the mental space to create, not because they were trying to survive, but because they were fully alive. And that tells us something enormous about what it actually means to be human, something that the way we live today seems to have almost entirely forgotten. Picture this. The sun is just beginning to rise, and someone wakes up next to a fire that never fully went out overnight. There's no alarm, no notification, no agenda waiting on a screen. A few people are already awake, passing around food left over from the day before, talking quietly, laughing softly. The morning starts slow, warm and social, not rushed, not anxious, not already behind on something. Mid-morning, a small group might head out to hunt or gather. But here's what most people don't realize. Not every day required that. If there was food from yesterday, the day simply belonged to whoever was living it. Some people made tools, others wove baskets or worked animal hides. No clock, no productivity quota, no manager watching over their shoulder. And when hunting did happen, it looked nothing like the dramatic sprinting scenes in movies. Persistence hunting meant following an animal at a steady trot for hours, patiently, until the animal overheated and collapsed. Calm, focused, methodical, not frantic. By early afternoon, the productive part of the day was essentially over. People rested in the shade. Children played. Someone napped. Others decorated themselves, told stories, or just sat together doing nothing in particular. And that last part, sitting together, wasn't wasted time. Anthropologist James Woodburn documented that these communities spent around 6 hours every single day in direct social interaction. 6 hours. Not because they had nothing else to do, but because relationships were the actual infrastructure of survival. Trust, cooperation, shared knowledge, these weren't soft benefits. They were the system, and understanding that completely reframes what productive actually means. Because if connection was their most essential resource, then maybe the way we've designed modern life has quietly stripped away the very thing that kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years. When the sun went down, something shifted. The work, whatever little there was done. And what happened next around that fire is one of the most quietly profound things anthropology has ever documented. In 2014, researcher Polly Wiesner spent years studying the conversations of the Kungsan people, comparing what they talked about during the day versus at night. During daylight hours, conversations were practical: food, tools, plans, logistics. But once darkness fell and the fire took over, 81% of all conversation became stories, myths, ancestors, journeys, jokes, the kind of talk that doesn't solve an immediate problem but builds something far more lasting. That firelight is where human culture was actually born. Gods, spirits, the concept of the past and the future, the idea that something exists beyond what you can touch right now, these thoughts don't emerge when you're hungry or exhausted or afraid. They emerge when your stomach is full, your body is safe, and your mind finally has room to wander somewhere bigger than survival. Every religion, every legend, every origin story that has ever existed traces back to a moment exactly like that one: a circle of people, a fire, and time to imagine. And then they slept, but not the way we sleep. Research into pre-industrial sleep patterns reveals something called biphasic sleep, a first sleep of roughly 4 hours, followed by 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in complete darkness, and then a second sleep of another 4 hours. That middle period wasn't insomnia, it was normal. It was used for reflection, for intimacy, for prayer, for simply existing in the stillness of the night. So when you add it all up, a full day in the ancient human world looked something like this: 4 to 6 hours of finding food, 6 hours of deep social connection, genuine rest in the afternoon, and 8 hours of natural sleep in 2 phases. No part of that day required justifying your own existence through output. No part of that life demanded that you be productive in order to deserve peace. And that gap between how we were designed to live and how we actually live today is something we haven't even begun to fully reckon with. About 10,000 years ago, in a region we now call the Fertile Crescent, something began that would permanently alter the human experience. It didn't start as a revolution. It started as a practical decision. Plant some seeds, stay close, eat more reliably, and for a moment, it probably felt like progress. More food meant more children surviving. More children meant more mouths. More mouths meant more fields. And just like that, there was no going back. The trap wasn't forced on anyone. It was logical, step by step until the exit disappeared entirely. And the cost was immediate and physical. The skeletons don't lie. We already saw that in part 2. Farmers worked longer hours than hunter-gatherers ever did. They ate a narrower, less nutritious diet. They got sick more often, aged faster, and died younger. The freedom that had defined human life for hundreds of thousands of years didn't disappear dramatically. It eroded slowly, season by season, harvest by harvest, obligation by obligation. Larger populations created new needs. Someone had to manage the grain stores. Someone had to defend the fields. Someone had to interpret the will of the gods who controlled the rain. And just like that, specialists emerged. Then hierarchies. Then taxes. Then the idea, radical and world-changing, that your time could belong to someone else in exchange for the right to survive within the system. That idea has never left. It just keeps changing its name. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you for a moment. Your ancient ancestors woke up every single day with nothing to prove. They made art because they had the time. They slept in 2 phases and used the quiet hours between them to simply think. They spent 6 hours a day in real human connection, not scheduled, not optimized, just alive. That life, unhurried, creative, deeply social, and free, is the exact life that millions of people today spend their entire working existence hoping to one day retire into. So here's the question I want to leave with you. What if the life you're exhausted from chasing was never the natural state to begin with? What if rest, connection, creativity, and time, the things that feel like luxuries today, are actually what your biology was built for all along? That's not a small question, and it doesn't have an easy answer, but it's worth sitting with. If this video made you feel something, if something here resonated or challenged the way you see your own life, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of content we make here. History that doesn't just inform you, it changes how you see yourself. Comment, "I remember right now," if this spoke to you. It genuinely helps more people find this. And if you want to keep going, the next video is right there on your screen. Don't stop here.